I've been recently working on a piece on the possibility that the origin of life is actually from the planet itself, where it's like life ascends from the depths to the surface. Like it seems entirely plausible. But one thing that I came across was I was trying to make an argument about the tendency to mistake the living for non-living. And I realized that we don't actually have that problem. Like, it's actually a pretty rare problem for us to point to something and be like, that's not
Like a
alive.
random human or a baby or anybody,
Or
really.
even a cell, right? Like, you come upon something slimy and you're like, that's probably alive. Like, there's not, the history of science is not scattered by a history of mistakes about the living status of an entity. There's a couple of places, right? Like, you have bones are alive, they were thought to be inert. Teeth, ligaments, cartilage, things that feel like they shouldn't be alive, but actually when you crack them open, you discover there's something regenerative in them. There's also like nanobes, which are mysteriously ambiguous, where they stain with DNA, but they're so small and they don't seem to have any structures. But the way that I want to wrap that back is that, okay, so we don't tend to have a tendency to mistake things that are alive for things that are not alive. But yet we do have a tendency to mistake things that have will and cognition and mind for things that don't. Why?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things there. One is even on the live part. So I pretty much with everything. I don't like binaries. I don't like binary categories. So I don't know what use it is to try to make living and non-living into a sharp category. I don't know what that. I mean, there's certainly people who work on that, and that's fine. So maybe there are other places. Maybe there are places where that's useful, but. I spend no time trying to figure out a crisp definition of that. I am very interested in the spectrum of cognition and how mistakes are made, as you just said, how mistakes are made on that spectrum. And so I think there's two ways to make a mistake on that spectrum. One is to guess low, and one is to guess high, right? So type one and type two errors. And so uh, all throughout science, the claim has been, this is sort of Morgan's canon, the claim has been that that guessing high is way worse. So always guess low. So people say, chemistry, everything should be at the level of chemistry. Always go for the mechanical explanation, the kind of the kind of simple chemistry kind of explanation. Um, and I think that's also a huge, and I think where that comes from is the desire of science at the beginning, when science was being formalized, to get away from the kind of primitive slash religious ideas, which just assumed that there were these inexplainable, you're right, so humans and some angels and some other stuff was sort of like this thing that was not well integrated into the physical world. There was a rift. There was a complete break, and right, and we've been trying to get away from that, and this idea that no, we can come up with rational explanations for things, that rocks don't fall because they want to fall, but because of these, like that was everybody was trying to sort of and I think maybe Carl Sagan wrote about this, to kind of exorcise these things from the physical world. And I think that might have been necessary at the time to get to where we are now, but we now need to build back up, because in an important way, that baby got thrown out with the bathwater there, in a fundamental way. And so maybe that was important to get us to rigorous science, but now we need to understand that actually a lot of the conceptual frameworks that come from behavior science, that come from cognitive science, extend well beyond the typical brainy things that they're applied to, and they are useful other places. And it's time to relax I call it teleophobia, this dread, concern that what happens if we apply some of these concepts that are typically used with creatures and their advanced creatures and their behavior. What happens if we apply those other places and they actually work? Right. That's a real fear, I think, that underlies a lot of this stuff.
Well,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's ironic that there's teleophobia that runs parallel to this crisis of meaning in the Western civilization right now. And it's like, I almost see it as a pendulum that's swung too far. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that we tried to remove all this superstition for fear that it would ruin our ability to make decisions in a material world. But then at some point, we've completely removed the possibility that there are different scales of goal-oriented behavior, different scales of will, essentially.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, and we regained some of that in the 40s with cybernetics. Some of that started coming back in because it became clear that it is no longer scary or mystical to have machines with purpose. That's what cybernetics was about. We have a good science of this now. Control theory, cybernetics. It is not magic anymore. We know that this is possible, and yet because of the anthropomorphism, a lot of people still insist on making these sharp categories. So people say things like this all the time. Living things are not machines. That's just a whatever, a paramecium, a slime mold. That's not like, I mean, I have real goals. What do you mean that thing has goals? That's not right. And so, right. And so, and then so you have to do this very basic kind of argument. I'm like, okay, well, let's walk you back till you were an unfertilized oocyte. Did you have goals then? And so, fine. Tell me where did they sneak into this picture? I mean, it's completely untenable. This idea that we are these sharp these sharp categories that just cannot be transgressed. And
what do you make of the sort of the selfish gene theory of the world, where the meaning and the goal orientedness is reserved simply for this replicon that wants more than anything to make more of itself?